When Elias Carter opened his eyes that morning, he expected nothing more than another ordinary day, working his land, tending to his crops, and relishing the simple life he'd always cherished. But what awaited him was a challenge beyond anything he could have imagined, a test of his resilience, his spirit, and the unbreakable bond of family. As Elias carried on with his daily chores, something caught his eye: two officers lingering at the edge of his property, their watchful gazes locked onto him. Their presence was anything but casual. What started as a routine display of authority quickly spiraled into a sinister confrontation fueled by prejudice and greed. This is a story of courage, of resilience, and it begins right here. Despite the hardships he faced simply because of the color of his skin, Elias Carter was no ordinary farmer. Beneath his quiet, humble demeanor lay a legacy of family strength and deep-rooted influence, one that would soon shake not just his oppressors, but the entire town. This is a journey of determination, a battle for justice. But before we dive deeper into Elias's gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're ready to be inspired, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The morning sun cast long shadows over Elias's farm as he went about his routine. At 76 years old, he moved slower than he once had, but his hands? Still steady as ever. Decades of working the land had left their mark, his skin weathered, his silvery hair cut close, his movements sure and practiced. Kneeling in the soil, he ran his fingers gently over a row of young corn, a satisfied smile touching his lips. Looking good this year, he murmured to himself. His farm wasn't massive by modern standards, but every inch of its 25 acres was treated with care. The crops? Immaculate. The fencing? Sturdy. The red barn? Freshly painted. His modest white farmhouse sat at the end of a dusty dirt driveway, its porch always swept clean, despite the ever-present Georgia red clay. This land wasn't just property, it was heritage. 3 generations of Carters had walked these fields, starting with his grandfather, who had purchased it after emancipation. Elias carried that legacy in every step he took. Later that morning, Elias climbed into his well-kept pickup and headed into town for supplies. As he pulled into Carson's general store, the familiar jingle of the bell above the door greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." James Carson, the young shopkeeper, called out. "How are those watermelons coming along?" Elias gave a rare, soft smile. "Coming along just fine. Should have the first batch ready in a couple of weeks." "Mom will be happy to hear that," James grinned. "No one's watermelons compare to yours, Mr. Carter." As Elias gathered his supplies, he couldn't help but notice the subtle ways people reacted to him. Mrs. Harrison, a retired teacher, gave him a polite nod. Others, like Bill Whitaker and his teenage son, deliberately avoided eye contact, shifting away when he passed. The unspoken racial divide of their small town played out in these quiet moments. James, sensing it, spoke softly as he rang up Elias's purchases. "Don't mind them, Mr. Carter. Some folks just can't move with the times." Elias sighed, his voice steady but weary. "Been that way all my life, son. Some things change slower than others." On the drive home, his gaze drifted to a photograph tucked into his dashboard. A younger version of himself, standing proudly beside his son, Marcus, on the day of his FBI Academy graduation. Now a high-ranking official, Marcus had come a long way from the curious boy who once followed Elias through the fields, asking endless questions. Pride swelled in Elias's chest, though he rarely spoke of his son's accomplishments. Drawing attention to success, especially as a black man in the South, often invited trouble. Just as that thought crossed his mind, flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled over. His heart pounded. 2 officers approached. Miller, stocky, with close-cropped blonde hair. Tucker, tall, lean, and permanently scowling. "Morning, officers. Something wrong?" Elias asked, keeping his hands where they could see them. "License and registration," Miller barked. As Elias reached for his documents, Tucker added, "Tail lights out." Elias's brow furrowed. "With all due respect, officer, I checked my lights just yesterday. They were working fine. Miller's voice sharpened. You calling my partner a liar?
No, sir.
Just stating a fact. Step out of the vehicle, Miller ordered. Elias complied, moving carefully. The officers inspected every inch of his truck, their true intentions clear. Passers-by slowed, watching as an elderly man was humiliated on the side of the road. Then, just as suddenly, Tucker smirked. Well, would you look at that? Tail lights working now. Must have been a loose connection. You're lucky this time, Miller sneered, handing back Elias's documents. Better keep everything in order, Mr. Carter. Never know when we might stop by again. Elias watched them drive away, his hands trembling against the wheel. Back at the farm, he tried to shake it off, tried to lose himself in work. But the unease wouldn't leave him. As the sun set over his fields, streaking the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias usually found peace. But tonight, that peace felt distant. He looked at his hands. Hands that had toiled this land for decades. Hands that had raised a son who fought for justice. And yet, these same hands trembled under the weight of the officer's veiled threats. Walking back to his house, he whispered into the darkness, Lord, give me strength. Unbeknownst to Elias, Miller and Tucker were already planning their next move. From the comfort of their patrol car, they plotted. You see how well-maintained his place is? Miller mused. Bet he's sitting on a nice pile of cash. Tucker nodded. People like him don't trust banks. Probably has money stashed all over that property. Their dark laughter filled the car as they schemed their next inspection. The next day, they arrived unannounced. Elias, tending to his tomatoes, turned to find them on his land. Routine property inspection, they claimed. False complaints. Bogus violations. One by one, they listed their fabricated offenses, each one accompanied by thinly veiled threats. This could mean serious trouble, Tucker warned. Unless, of course, you handle it unofficially. $2,000 should cover it. Elias's stomach churned. The money he had been saving for irrigation equipment gone. But the harassment didn't stop. Week after week, new demands. New threats. His farm, once thriving, began to wither under the weight of their corruption. Finally, unable to endure it any longer, he confided in Marcus. His son was outraged, and he took action. Marcus contacted the FBI. The investigation began, and soon, the entire corrupt scheme unraveled. When Miller and Tucker returned for their next shakedown, they were met not with a frightened farmer, but with a team of federal agents. Marcus led the charge, watching as justice was finally served. Their crimes?
Exposed. The town? Shaken.
Change had begun. 3 months later, Elias's farm stood as a symbol of resilience. Volunteers came together to restore what had been lost. A community, once divided, now rebuilt. And as the Georgia sun dipped below the horizon, Elias Carter knew